So far in this course on the SaaS game, we have discussed why VCs love the SaaS game and why the SaaS model is good for customers as well. Next, we will be analyzing the actual pitch decks of three famous SaaS startups, Buffer, Front, and Viva. I will ask you to put yourself in the VC's shoes and decide whether you will invest in the startup or pass on it based on the information in the pitch decks. But before you can start analyzing the pitch decks, you will need to understand a few key SaaS metrics that you will encounter in them. This will help you better appreciate the state of these startups at the time when these pitch decks were made. I will also mention a few rules of thumb that VCs usually use on some of these metrics to quickly assess the health of the startup. If you are well aware of common SaaS metrics, you may skip this video. We will discuss three kinds of SaaS metrics: revenue and expense metrics, churn metrics that tell you how many customers are canceling their subscription, and customer lifetime value metrics that tell you how much revenue an average customer generates for the startup in its lifetime before canceling the subscription. Let's start with the revenue and expense metrics. The first metric to know is a SaaS startup's monthly recurring revenue, or MRR. This is the total value that the startup realizes in a month from all its active subscribers. These are customers who are using the SaaS product and are actively being billed. If a customer has signed a contract but hasn't begun using the SaaS product yet, so it isn't being billed yet, then that customer would not count in MRR. Even if the customer has paid in advance but active billing hasn't started, the customer would not count in MRR. Also, if a customer has paid for a full year in a lump sum, only 1/12 of the amount will count in MRR as per accrual accounting practices. One more thing, any one-off revenue, service revenue, or material supply revenue, etc. that isn't the result of a subscription to a SaaS product does not count in MRR. In this chart, the orange bars show an example of a startup growing its MRR from $18,000 to $75,000 over 6 months. Next is annual recurring revenue, or ARR. This one is a bit tricky because ARR is a misnomer. Even though ARR has the word revenue in it, ARR is not revenue at all. ARR is a revenue run rate, an estimate of what the annual revenue might be. And the way this estimate is made is simple. You just take the latest MRR and multiply it by 12. If you are thinking that this is a terrible way to make an estimate, you are correct. ARR is a terrible estimate of annual revenue because it assumes that MRR will be constant for the next 12 months, that there will be no growth and no decline either, which is strange. But unfortunately, ARR is one of the most widely used metrics in SaaS. Most VCs will ask for a startup's ARR and will even value a startup based on a rough multiple of its ARR. The blue bars show the ARR of this startup. Now, you would also track the number of active subscribers or paying users of the startup in any month and how they are growing month on month. So, if you divide the startup's ARR by the number of its paying users, you will get the average revenue per user, or ARPU. So the ARPU of the startup is increasing from $9,400 to $15,000 over these 6 months. Next, direct costs. These are the costs that are directly necessary to generate revenue. For a SaaS company, only server costs and salaries paid to support personnel are usually considered to be direct costs. This brings us to gross margin. This is the percentage of MRR left over after accounting for direct costs. So to get gross margin, you subtract direct costs from MRR and divide by MRR. The gross margin of this startup is quite stable. It starts at 92% in month 1 and ends at 88% in month 6. We have discussed gross margin in a previous video where I explained the iron law of gross margins and why SaaS companies have very high gross margins. VCs expect SaaS startups to have at least 80% gross margins. If a startup has a lower gross margin, it is usually indicative of one of two things. Either the software is a commodity without differentiation, so the startup is facing strong pricing pressure from competitors, or the startup is counting low margin commodity revenue in its MRR. For example, if a startup accounts service revenue as MRR, its gross margin will take a beating because services are usually highly competitive. It is very difficult to make 80% gross margin in services. Next, you would track the sales and marketing costs of the startup month on month. And if you divide the sales and marketing costs in a month by the number of paying users added in that month, you will get the startup's customer acquisition cost, or CAC. Moving on to churn metrics. Churn is when a customer cancels their subscription to the SaaS product. There is voluntary churn, when a customer cancels their subscription because they don't want to use the SaaS anymore, or there is involuntary churn, where the subscription is cancelled because the customer goes out of business. This chart shows the MRR from the previous example in months 5 and 6. The startup grew rapidly. MRR grew by 50% in 1 month, from $50,000 to $75,000. Now, this growth would have come by adding new customers as well as by selling upgrades to existing customers. Also, this growth would have come despite some customers downgrading or cancelling their subscription between the 2 months. To untangle all of this, you can look at the cohort of only those customers who counted towards the MRR in month 5. There were 46 customers in month 5 who led to the MRR of $50,000. Now, let's look at only these 46 customers in month 6 and check how much MRR they contributed in month 6. That number was $55,000. This is called retained MRR, the MRR that the startup was able to retain in a month from the previous month's cohort of customers. Of the 46 customers in the previous month's cohort, 2 customers cancelled their subscriptions that were contributing a total of $3,000 to MRR. This is called churned MRR. Further, 3 customers from the cohort downgraded their subscription plans, so their contribution to MRR decreased by $2,000. This is called contraction MRR. Also, 6 customers from the previous month's cohort upgraded their subscription plans, so their contribution to MRR increased by $10,000. This is called expansion MRR. Note that expansion MRR is a part of retained MRR, but churned MRR and contraction MRR are not. Next, the startup added 14 new customers in month 6, which contributed $15,000 to MRR. This is called new MRR. Finally, the startup was also able to resurrect 2 customers who had cancelled their subscriptions in previous months. These resurrections contributed $5,000 to the MRR in month 6. This is called resurrected MRR. Now that we have labels for breaking down MRR into different components, let's move on to actual churn metrics. One common metric you will encounter is customer churn. It's also called logo churn or volume churn. It is defined as the number of customers who cancelled their subscriptions in a month divided by the number of active subscribers in the previous month. So, in our example, this is 2 divided by 46, which is 1.37% per month. The problem with customer churn is that it does not take into account the proportion of MRR that the churned customers were contributing. So, if a large customer with a lot of MRR churns, customer churn may remain low even though the MRR would have taken a bigger hit. To solve this problem, startups track gross MRR churn or value churn. It is defined as churned MRR plus contraction MRR divided by MRR in the previous month. In our example, this is 5 divided by 50, 10% per month, which is shockingly large for the startup in our example. If the startup keeps churning 10% of its revenue every month, it will have churned through its entire revenue base in just 10 months. This looks like a very bad situation and could indicate a serious product market fit problem. Maybe the customers are paying for a few months to try the product out and then churning out because they are not finding enough value in the product. Gross MRR churn of more than 2% per month is a massive red flag for a VC evaluating a SaaS startup. So despite massive month-on-month growth of 50%, this startup looks like it is in bad shape. But remember that the customer churn was quite reasonable, just 1.37% per month. This means that very few customers have actually churned, but a large amount of MRR has churned, which could happen if one large customer churned in the month. This may be a one-off situation and may not reveal a worrying trend. Therefore, VCs use both customer churn and MRR churn together to get a fuller picture. A final step in measuring churn is net MRR churn. It is defined as churned MRR plus contraction MRR minus expansion MRR divided by MRR in the previous month. So what's happening here is that we are adding the impact of all churn and downgrades and then subtracting the impact of upgrades. So we can get a sense of how good the startup is in generating value out of its existing customer base. In our example, net MRR churn is -5 divided by 50, which is -10% per month, which is extremely good. Negative churn means that MRR from the previous cohort of customers is increasing. So even if a few customers are churning out or downgrading, the customers who remain are expanding their usage so fast that the impact of churn and contraction is more than neutralized. So even if a startup with negative net MRR churn couldn't add new customers in a month, its MRR would still grow just because of account expansion. Negative net MRR churn is a very strong signal for VCs. Moving on to lifetime value metrics. The first metric is the average customer lifetime. This is the time that a customer on average continues the subscription before churning out, either voluntarily or involuntarily. This is just 1 divided by the customer churn or logo churn. The next metric is customer lifetime value or LTV, which is defined as the total amount of gross margin that you make from an average customer during their lifetime with the subscription. Now, LTV is easy to measure once you know the average customer lifetime. You just multiply the average customer lifetime with ARPU to get the average revenue you expect from a customer over its lifetime, and multiply that by the gross margin percentage to get the average gross margin you expect from a customer over its lifetime, which is LTV. One quick note on LTV. LTV is all the value that you can expect to receive from a customer, and CAC is the amount you spend on acquiring a customer. So, for a business that can ever be profitable after acquiring a customer, you must have an LTV by CAC ratio that's more than 1. VCs expect this ratio to be at least 3 for a healthy business. Finally, let's discuss cohort analysis. This is a common way for SaaS startups to visualize churn and retention. You will encounter this in the SaaS pitch decks that we will discuss next. Look at the first row of this table. This row shows the journey of the cohort of 10 customers who started their subscription in March 21. In March, these 10 customers contributed $100 to the startup's MRR. Then, in the next month, April 21, these same customers contributed 116% or $116 to the MRR. Again, in the next month, May 21, this cohort contributed $125 to the MRR, and so on until the 6th month of measurement, August 21, when this cohort of 10 customers contributed $134 to MRR. This cohort analysis captures all the effects of churn, contraction, expansion, as well as resurrection in this cohort. For example, if we look at the row of April 21, 11 new customers were acquired in April with an initial MRR of $110, but only 87% of this MRR remained in the next month, perhaps because some of the customers from the cohort would have churned or severely downgraded their use of the SaaS. Or if we look at the row of May 21, 22 new customers were acquired in May with an initial MRR of $190. But MRR from this cohort decreased sharply in the next month, perhaps because some of the customers churned. But in month 4, MRR from the cohort increased dramatically, perhaps because some of the lost customers were resurrected. Finally, if we average all the numbers in a column, we can get a general sense of how the startup expands its usage and MRR in any cohort in the months after a customer has been onboarded. For example, if a startup has a customer success department that engages customers in the 3rd month after onboarding to get upsells, its impact should be visible with a clear increase in month 3 in this row. Alright, so this video was a bit longer than usual, but if you have followed so far, you are now ready to analyze the real pitch decks of Buffer, Front and Viva on your own. If you are following this course on our website www.relentless.ventures, the pitch decks are available in the next section. I will see you again after you have analyzed the pitch decks.
Hey there, I'm KJ Saxena, founder of Relentless VC. The video you just watched is part of the Venture Capital and Entrepreneurship Specialization, which is available absolutely for free on relentless.ventures. Go check it out. If you're a tech startup founder and want to raise money from us, you should apply on our website. Lastly, if you like this video, do subscribe and share it with your friends.